name is Frank Adloff. I'm a professor of sociology at the University of Hamburg in Germany, and I'm researching the various ecological catastrophes contemporary societies are currently facing. And besides this, I'm the spokesperson of the International Convivialist Association, a charitable association building the backbone, so to speak, of the Convivialist International. So first of all, I'd like to give you an overview about the plan for today, and secondly, introduce you to the topic. So my introduction will be about convivialism from France to Europe and beyond. After that, Alain Caillé will be the second speaker from France, a sociologist and one of the important spiritual directors of the concept of convivialism of the First and the Second Manifesto, and he will talk about the Third Convivialist Manifesto, planetary process. And then Catarina Neves from Portugal will be the third speaker, and she will focus on the universal basic income idea and about scaling up universal basic income. And then we have comments. Right now, it's Raywin Cornell present from Australia giving a comment, and we are still waiting for Madhulika Banerjee from India and Thais Agua, and hope that they will show up in a minute. And after that, we'll have the possibility for a discussion and a debate, and we'll see what follows out of that if presented and how you would like to react to that. So first of all, what is convivialism? If we were to present it in the shortest possible terms, we could say that convivialism is a public philosophy of the art of living together by either cooperating or opposing, but without slaughtering each other. That could be the definition in a nutshell. And this philosophy was developed through two manifestos. The first one was published in 2013 and was signed by more than 60 intellectuals, academics, mainly from the social sciences and humanities, and activists, all of them mainly French-speaking. Title of that Declaration of Interdependence, and I will come back to that later. It was then translated into various languages. The second manifesto has a subtitle For a Post-Neoliberal World, and it was published in 2019, and that was co-signed by nearly 300 persons from 35 different countries. But what is most noteworthy is that they come from very diverse ideological backgrounds, ranging from the left to the center right. And that was, so to speak, the beginning of a transnational collective effort. And what has brought these people together is a sense of absolute urgency in the face of the dramatic crisis of the time. For example, the climatic and environmental crisis, the economic crisis, the social crisis, the geostrategic conflicts and wars, the crisis of democracy and the strength of the far right, etc., etc. The second certainty is that it is impossible to deter all these threats without breaking free from the domination of a global financial capitalism that has gone wild over the last 50 years. Or to put it in another way, humanity cannot survive by relying on infinite economic growth in a finite world. The third point is that we need to develop an alternative political philosophy more powerful and relevant than current neoliberalism. Modern political ideologies such as liberalism, socialism, anarchism, or communism, they are not dead, but for various reasons, they are no longer up to the task of our time. And convivialism could be seen as an attempt to go beyond them. The writers and co-signers of the two. The principle of common sociality is a third principle, and that is pointing at the fact that the greatest wealth we have as humans is the ties that form that we form to each other, the bonds, are crucial, and that is the reason why convivialism can be seen as a radically relational approach. The fourth principle is the principle of legitimate individuation. That means that it is legitimate for each human being to seek recognition for his or her singularity. But then we have to acknowledge that conflicts are inevitable. People cannot agree on everything, and then there's a necessity of the fifth principle, the principle of creative opposition. That means opposition is only legitimate and desirable as long as it is in a way encapsulated and regulated. Then there's a sixth principle that can be seen as a transversal or a categorical imperative. It's the imperative of controlling hubris, that is the vanity and arrogance of the powerful, whether in the economic domain or in the domains of political power or culture or technology. And what convivialism aims at is a kind of a balance between these four principles while respecting common naturalness and avoiding the releasing of hubris. Furthermore, in the two manifestos are very concrete political measures included. For example, a maximum income or the eradication of tax havens. We have the idea of a planetary parliament of citizens, or there's also the demand for universal basic income, about which Katharina will talk in a minute. As I already said, in 2019, the Second Convivialist Manifesto was published and then signed by nearly 300 people from many parts of the world. And the aim was to start setting up a new inclusive international movement, and therefore we also founded this association, the ICA. However, convivialism still is mainly endorsed by people from Europe or other parts of the global north. We have not yet managed to start a transnational global dialogue on principles of conviviality that includes much more perspectives. For example, those of the people from the global south, especially from African or Asian countries. We need, one could say, to upset the balance of powers, discouraging women, non-heterosexual people, queer people, people of color, poor and marginalized groups and their forms of knowledge or epistemic cultures in many societies of the South, but also in the North. So what we want to create is a discussion on equal footing that is encompassing and that aims at deprovincializing and universalizing convivialism. Therefore, we think that it is time for a Third Manifesto to tackle the most pressing current issues and to develop a plan for systemic change at all levels of society. In this session, we will thus explore ways to deprovincialize and universalize the manifesto by opening it up to intellectuals and activists from the South and the East. So the question is, how could we come to a universalism that is not only a form of a masked hegemony of the global north, aims at a pluriverse of convivialities? So we're very happy that you and are grateful that we have some comments on these important questions. So thank you very much. And if you have an immediate question, you can raise your hand and we could quickly discuss that. Otherwise, I see one hand there. Ferhat Kantel, please.
Hello to everyone. I am obliged to leave this sequence around 2 o'clock Turkish time. So I am sorry from the beginning, but just another question. Is it possible to have some correspondence with you if I want to write to you, for example? Can you give us your mail address just on the...
Sure. We plan to put that into the chat at the end, but we can do that already now. So we have this website, convivialism.org, and also an email address. And I think Oliver would will put it into the chat right now. Thank you. All right, then I'd like to hand over to Alain Caillé, please.
Well, thank you, Frank, for your introduction. I admire your English, good English. I apologize for mine, which is very, very poor. I'll try. I don't like reading a text. I'll try to speak it. I think that the two Convivialist Manifesto you just presented can be held to be a good achievement, a very excellent achievement of what might be called radicalized, universalized social democrat project. Social democrat, it talks about democracy. It explains why we cannot have any other ideal than the democratic one, even though it's not easy to define. It also explains why this democratic ideal cannot work if it relies on huge inequalities, such as those which exist nowadays in the whole world, where 2 or 3 dozens ultra-rich possess as much as the poor half of humanity. This cannot work. We cannot believe in democracy anymore. We cannot have faith in it with such inequalities. All this, I think, is very well explained in the two manifestos. It's an achievement, but it is totally insufficient. Why? About 20 years ago, the American sociologist Nancy Fraser criticized the German philosopher Axel Honneth for having given too much importance to the struggles for recognition and not enough to what she calls the redistribution struggles. I think she was right. She was right, but I think she did not see enough how these struggles for recognition are important, and they are getting more and more important every day. What do we see nowadays? We see the ancient empires, China, Russia, Turkey, India, trying to recover their past glory and power. We see the struggles between religions, between cultures. We see the struggles between the ex-colonized and the ex-colonizers. We see the struggles between sexes and genders. We see the struggles between youngsters and elders, between youngsters and boomers, as it is often said, and so on and so on. They speak really about that, which is becoming more and more important every day. We have to address this problem. The two manifestos gave an idea of what could be said, what could be thought. They said that, and you reminded it, Frank, they said that one of the problems we face is that the ancient ideologies of modernity, liberalism, socialism, communism, anarchism, all more or less believed that the main problem for humanity is the scarcity of means. They thought that if men and women, of course, fight each other, because they lack sufficient material means to satisfy their needs. I think this is false. Well, anyway, we cannot rely on this idea because we know we cannot produce ever more and ever more to satisfy ever more needs. So there's no way in this direction, no solution. The fact is that this assumption, which was at the core of this ideology, the assumption that the main problem of humanity is the scarcity of material means, this assumption is false. That's the good news, but it is also bad news. It's a good news because if it is true that it is false, that it is wrong, then we do not need to produce ever more to satisfy those material needs. We can try something else. That's the good news. The bad news is that it's much easier to produce ever more if we don't lack material resources. It's much easier to produce ever more than to regulate the struggle for recognition between humans. The struggle for recognition, which goes together with the struggle for legitimate individuation. If everybody wants to be recognized, and I think that's the human truth, of course, we have to satisfy our needs if we want to survive physically. But the main thrust of human agency is the desire to be recognized, to have one's value recognized. But if it is so, and I think it is so, the problem is who is legitimate to recognize whom? What does it mean to be recognized? Who will be the recognizer? Who will be the recognized? And so on and so on. In the frame of the empires or nation states, the answer was relatively easy. There was a dominant power, hegemonic power, which distributed recognition. But this doesn't work anymore. We don't have a universal worldly empire. So nobody knows who is legitimate to recognize or to be recognized. That's the main question we have to face. More precisely, for the time being, the only dominant hegemonic way to be recognized is to become richer and richer. That it has become the only world value. And it's catastrophic because it goes together with exploitation of nature and so on and so on. So we have to devise other values, following which we can be recognized, legitimately recognized. Well, there are many things. We can be recognized as good citizens. We can be recognized as writers. We can be recognized as sportsmen. We can be, or women. We can be recognized as cookers, and so on, and so on, and so on. But all these other values that getting ever more money each day have to be put in the front stage. And we have to see how they can be universalized, how millions and millions of people can recognize themselves in this other project, this post-neoliberal project. And for that, you said it, Frank, we need, of course, to write and to prepare a third manifesto, which will not come only from the global north, because we face now the main fight is between the global south and the global north, which is the global west, in fact. So we have to write a third manifesto, which comes not only from the global north, but also from all the world. Those are the few words I wanted to tell you.
Thank you so much, Alain. If there are no immediate questions, I would say that then the next speaker is Katharina, and maybe just could you introduce yourself very briefly to the audience? Thank you.
Sure. Hi, everyone. So good morning, good afternoon, good night, wherever you are. My name is Katharina. I'm a political philosopher, a researcher on unconditional basic income in Portugal, Lisbon, where I'm now. And I'm also an activist working at UBI for All, which is a nonprofit, a global nonprofit that advocates for the idea of an unconditional basic income across the world by raffling off unconditional basic incomes of 800 euros for 1 year. And this is a way in which we believe the word about UBI can be spread to every corner of the world. And we have supporters and colleagues from everywhere that just join UBI for All whenever they can. So today, as it was already mentioned, I'm going to be speaking about an unconditional basic income, both as an activist and as a researcher. And I hope you'll be convinced that a UBI is only a viable policy if it is implemented at a global planetary scale. So if it is implemented for everyone. Just to make sure that everyone knows what an unconditional basic income or universal basic income is, a brief definition. So it is a cash transfer that is individual. So contrary to a lot of cash transfer, it's not granted to a household. So if I was here with my family of 4, each one of us would have their own unconditional basic income. It is universal. So it means that everyone in a political community will receive it. And this is a lot of the topic that I will be discussing, because then we need to define what is the political community. I will define it globally. It is unconditional, which is the centerpiece of a UBI, hence why I call it unconditional basic income. So it makes it distinct because it's no strings attached. It means that we receive it regardless of our occupation, or of having no occupation, regardless of our wealth. So if I was a pensioner, I would receive it. If I'm a student, I also receive it. It's a top-up that we receive, a top-up to our income, or if we don't have any income, we will have an unconditional basic income, which provides, as you can imagine, a very strong exit option. It grants us the opportunity to say that I don't want to continue in an occupation, or that I don't want to continue perhaps even in having a familiar household or having a relationship, and I can have my material independence and exit that arrangement if I want. And most importantly, depending on the proposals, it allows for a decent life. And this means that an unconditional basic income in its ideal form, or what we should be striving for, I think, should be a cash grant that allows us to have a decent life, maybe closer to the subsistence level, or even higher. Some people talk about a living wage. Why not having a UBI that's close to a living wage? So this is the idea of an unconditional or universal basic income that I will be calling basic income for the rest of this small discussion. So why should we, and I'm going to jump right in, why should we strive, or why should we advocate for going global? So a lot of people talk about a basic income, but then when we ask them where should we implement it, they say it should be within nation-state borders, or perhaps a higher supranational community, like maybe within Latin America or maybe within Europe, but nothing global. And this is often because there are fears about what solidarity can we create at a global scale. Can we ensure that we have a policy that is the same for everyone, when people in different corners of the world might share very little, or might perhaps feel strongly opposed to being solidaristic with other people in different corners of the world? Besides the issue of solidarity, there are a lot of people saying that it's very difficult, it's not feasible to have a global unconditional basic income. Who will pay for it? How are we going to ensure a mechanism that allows it to scale it up? So one is a question on feasibility, which we can easily counter with different proposals for taxation. Another one, sometimes deemed more difficult, it's a question about solidarity, and how can we promote solidarity to have a global unconditional basic income. But I would like to propose that this is possible, although I'm not going to focus so much on feasibility, but most importantly, desirable, and we can and certainly have the reasons to do so and to be fighting for it. So the first one, and I'm going to say it quickly so that we can move on to the more interesting ones, it's sort of an instrumental reason. So if we were to implement an unconditional basic income in one country, we can imagine that it will be too desirable, it will be too good for not to promote immigration and strong immigration fluxes to that country. And that would be very nice, but it will certainly create asymmetries between countries that would be deemed unfair. That's, for example, the reason why a lot of people say that if a basic income is implemented in a country in Europe or within the European space, probably it has to be implemented supranationally in Europe, because we would want to ensure that there's a similarity of policies across that context. But regardless of this instrumental argument in terms of immigration, and we do live in a globalized world, I think there are 3 arguments that make a stronger case for a global basic income. So the first one is, we should be giving power and resources to people for across the world for them to be able to fight the current challenges that we are facing that are not localized challenges, namely, as we already know and we've discussed, the climate crisis, but also the impacts on the labor market from automation and the technological development. These are not local challenges. They might be felt differently and they might have differentiated impacts across time and space, but they are global challenges. There is a strong case to be able to devote every one of the resources, and especially the most vulnerable people across the world, resources to be able to fight these challenges and to counter their negative impacts the best that they can. And the UBI can certainly help. It wouldn't be sufficient, but it's certainly probably a necessary condition to fight these challenges. A second one, and I think a strong one, is a redistributive claim for a global unconditional basic income. What does this mean? So there's a sense in which a strong case for UBI is that it would allow a massive redistribution of wealth, of income, but certainly also perhaps of wealth from those who have more across the world. And we know that in a lot of senses it's concentrated in the global north or the global west, but there are strong pockets of wealth and income across the world that could be redistributed to those who are worse off, those who are more vulnerable, who have less across the world. And this could be done if a global unconditional basic income is funded at a global scale. If we think about global corporate taxes, if we think about global inheritance taxes, or global financial transaction taxes. This would allow a very strong and big, massive redistribution of wealth from those who have more to those who have less. And this can even be made stronger if we think about a case for reparations to the global south for a lot of the colonial destruction, colonial expropriation that happened in the global south through the mechanisms that came from the global north. So I think a UBI could be a great mechanism to do this at a global scale. Finally, one of the arguments for a global UBI is the argument that a UBI should and could be funded through resources that belong to us all. So oftentimes we talk about redistribution, we talk about wanting to have a fairer distribution of resources across the world, but we forget that a UBI could allow, most importantly, to set the scale, the baseline level of resources like land, like water. Often we discuss natural resources, but we could even go into technology that have been appropriated, but they are either from everyone, right? No one owned the land first, no one should have owned the land first. And technology is a global effort that was done through the efforts and the struggles of a lot of people for a long time. So if we could tax it and give it to everyone, it doesn't make sense to do it only at a nation scale level. It should be global, and this would be the fair outcome that we could have. So I believe an unconditional basic income at a global level would be a fairer, more just solution to be able to promote redistribution of wealth, to deal with the challenges that we currently face at a global level, and perhaps to set the scale right in terms of the distribution of resources that do not belong to anyone or shouldn't have belonged to anyone. And to close, I just would like to say two things. So in our work at UBI for All, we notice how a UBI for all at a global scale would impact differently. What do I mean with this? When I'm saying that it should be global, I'm not saying that it's going to have the same impacts across the world in the same way. And I think that's the beauty of an unconditional basic income. So when we talked with people from Taiwan, for example, a lot of them told us that a basic income would be transformative because young people feel the pressure to need to continue to work in the tech industry, for example, and they could have an exit option to choose the occupation that they would like to have. Or when I talked with people in Zambia who are also striving and fighting for an unconditional basic income, they said it would be beneficial because we could promote and we could fight for more sustainable agriculture in our country. Or when I talked with people in the US, they told me an unconditional basic income, it would be transformative because of the very violently flexible labor market that we have, and we would have to have a safety net like a UBI to counter these effects of the labor market that are very pernicious for a lot of us. So this possibility of having such a strong, different impact across the world, I think it's very hopeful to have such a solution that it's not, again, sufficient for all of our problems, but it can have very strong impacts differently across the world, which also means that it can adapt to both the very specific challenges that every people in different corners of the world is facing, but also challenges that we face collectively and that we should be facing together, or should be fighting together to face them. This is better. So, to close, I think all of this makes for a very strong case for a global basic income. If we want to discuss the objections afterwards, we can, and I would be very happy to do it. But just close to say, importantly, a global UBI fulfills what is the desideratum of an unconditional basic income. A basic income is universal. It doesn't make sense to talk about universal on a nation state scale. Universal means for everyone. So that's what we should be fighting when we talk about a basic income. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Katharina. Very interesting, and the pros and cons of the UBI. Some questions or comments to that, but let us postpone that to later for the open discussion. And I would propose that we go on with the more general comments. Currently, we have two commentators here present at our Zoom meeting, Thais and Ravin. And Thais, maybe you could start with your comment and introduce you very briefly to the audience.
Of course. Well, it's a pleasure to be with you on this Convivialist panel. I'm a professor at the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. I'm speaking now from Buenos Aires, where I have been doing research for a few months. I translated the First and the Second Manifestos into Portuguese, and I am a member of the Brazilian Convivialist group. I'd like to make some brief comments on the task of formulating the Third Manifesto based on the challenges posed by Latin America. Point one, the manifesto will have to resume the dispute over political grammar. Bolsonarism remains persistent in Brazil, and a kind of libertarian or anarcho-capitalism neoliberalism is the new experiment led by Javier Milei in Argentina. Not to mention other experiments such as the of Nayib Bukele in El Salvador, who has become a leadership increasingly evoked by right-wing politicians on the continent. These models reinforce neoliberal formulas and advance proposals that are totally contrary to the convivialist proposal. They strike hard at the principle of all convivialist principles, that is, the categorical principle of the limitation of hubris, the limitation of unbridled, the limitation of extreme wealth, and the will to massacre. This experience challenged convivialist political philosophy to resignify and dispute notions, rights, and values that previously seemed undisputable or consensual, even if they were difficult to universalize in practice. Today, the ideas of freedom, equality, and democracy have their meanings increasingly shaped by the neoliberal right force. How far the progressive banners have fallen since the last manifesto. Political grammar now becomes the terrain of a struggle. In seeking to forge a utopian function to build a new world, the manifesto has the challenge of deconstructing the terms and the means that neoliberalism pushes forward. Latin America neoliberal experiments have spread the idea of the legitimacy of inequality and the delegitimization of social justice among the masses of workers. In this way, they excite the audience of business elites, as we saw in the World Economic Forum in Davos. This is a new phase in the application of the neoliberal playbook in the South. These experiments have made progress in convincing sections of the population that inequality is inevitable. More than that, these experiments project inequality as an object of desire. By condemning social justice as a state-sponsored death, these projects are imploding the political measures that seek to promote equality. In impoverished societies, like those in Latin American countries, the need to establish oneself as a popular or a plebeian project becomes an imperative for neoliberals who wanted to come to power through elections. The neoliberals seduce the masses by talking about defending the poor and ending the poverty. To do this, they present capitalism as the best option for generating wealth, giving it the form of an axiom or irrefutable premise. With no other economic projects to offer against the market economy, progressive forces limit themselves to proposing corrections to this economy and introducing ethical parameters. It seems that it has been insufficient to deconstruct or to weaken the neoliberal axiom of the production of wealth with concentration of wealth. Today, neoliberals praise capitalists, entrepreneurs, and marketmen as heroic benefactors. Faced with all this, increasingly large portions of Latin American societies that were re-democratized a few decades ago are no longer enchanted by democracy or care about the promise of democracy, especially those that were about equality and limiting the excesses of capital. Bolsonaro, Milei, and Bukele also speak in the name of democracy. We need to be aware of this. They are operating a dangerous neoliberalization of the meanings of democracy. In order to transform the world, convivialist proposal needs to fix the universal reference, wage the battle of meanings, and reveal invisible antagonisms. Without this, it will never be possible to arouse in individuals the affection of indignation at the social wills and the affection of shame at anti-social attitudes as a way of regulating social life, as evoked by the Convivialist Manifesto. Point 2. It's important to highlight the issues of race and ethnicity. Not everything is a wasteland. In the society of Global South, the local and international convivialities are also being forged. They prefigure fundamental elements for the societies of our aspiration. These emerging sociabilities are among the last frontiers of the neoliberal advance now. They are being brutally attacked by the privatization and by the new extractivist project. These emerging sociabilities are disruptive convivialities include Black quilombolas communities, indigenous communities, forest people, and traditional peoples. They resist a brutal confrontation with the projects of the neoliberal right today. Although some segments sometimes surrender to neoliberal seduction, the Convivialist manifestos have recognized that centuries-old knowledge, traditional technologies, and the practice of resistance provide valuable elements for the transition to a new era. However, more needs to be said. For societies like those in Latin America, the legacy of colonization and enslavement still produces open wounds. It is therefore crucial that racial and ethnic issues and the modes of racism are highlighted in the convivialist discourse. For Brazilian convivialists, it is very clear that this issue is at the heart of the democratic questions, because without overcoming racist and colonizing prejudice, there can be no progress in convivialist democracy. It's important to remember that this issue is deliberately absent or misrepresented in the neoliberal discourse. Let's talk about defending the rights of men and women, citizens, workers, the unemployed, and the children, as well as Black men and women and quilombolas, indigenous and forest people, traditional peoples. We know it is possible to highlight the racial and ethnic question, placing it in the key of building common ground. Last one, point 3. It's important to address the challenge of urban violence. The neoliberal discourse makes invisible the latent antagonisms in the world. This antagonism has caused all forms of violence, as the Convivialist Manifestos point out. However, for the progressive forces in Latin America, the urban life is a very sensitive and challenging issue that they are facing. The upsurge of urban violence has created opportunities for the affirmation of right-wing punitive discourses and the validation of the militarist and authoritarian formulas of neoliberalism. It has served as the justification for a kind of carceral government actions, such as Bukele's, have succeeded in reducing rates of urban violence by violating the most basic human rights. And paradoxically, these governments do not lose support, popular support. Even then, they may increase their support. This is an important element that in societies like those in Latin America has led people to abandon the promise of democracy as we knew it. That is it. Thank you for listening. Let's move on. Another word has to be possible.
Thank you so much, Thais. I'm sure we'll come back to these very important questions and the 3 points you mentioned. But before that, we will go on with the next comment, and that is by Raywin Cornell. So the floor is yours, and please just introduce yourself with 1 or 2 sentences.
Sure. I'm a sociologist, now retired, but still a life member of the National Tertiary Education Union in Australia. So greetings from Australia, which is a settler colonial country in the far south of the world. I'm speaking from the unceded land of the Gadigal people, the Indigenous custodians of the land on which a large part of the city of Sydney is built. I've found the manifesto that we're talking about stimulating in all kinds of ways. I think it's great to see a network of intellectual workers taking large responsibility in the world, addressing the massive problems that exist on a world scale rather than focusing on small professional domains, and trying to inspire change. So all that very positive. And I must say I particularly enjoyed the way the authors of the manifesto gave attention to the promising developments in recent history, in contemporary society, from decolonisation, continuing decolonisation to lineups. The promises of the present seem to me that is good thinking and important, that should be a prominent part of progressive social analysis. As I understand, the central concern, the central problem, if you like, the reasons why we are not moving faster and further in promising directions are the out-of-control finance-dominated capitalism that dominates our economic life, and the neoliberal ideology that validates and legitimates the current economic institutions. And from that, the authors of the manifesto deduced a key responsibility for intellectuals, which is to come up with new syntheses, new ideas syntheses of ideas, concepts, values, which in my reading of the text, I guess if I tried to boil it down, I would say that these the proposed direction for seeking new syntheses is to emphasize different kinds of relatedness and combine that with a defense of equality, or at least, since that is not prominent in the language of the manifesto, at least limit on the hubris, the arrogance, and the capacities of the powerful to do harm. So I guess we're all practicing intellectuals have a concern about these issues, are in search of the most helpful way to formulate the problems and to direct our own energies and the energies of other radical intellectuals. And I think the lines of thought in the manifesto certainly overlap with most of the diagnoses or agendas that I'm familiar with, although maybe other agendas and formulations would not use the language or formulate the issues in quite the same way. When I think, for instance, of what I would think of the most fundamental concerns of my own work as a scholar and writer, they would be a little knobbier, I suppose. I would say there were two: social justice on the one hand and collective survival on the other. And so the concern around survival is certainly formulated in the manifesto. I'm not sure that I could formulate it any better. To speak of social justice means that you must declare a concern, even a very basic concern, with the interests and needs of the least advantaged groups in this social formation or in the world in general. That is more or less a definition of social justice. And if we go to the statements, the declarations, the agendas of movements among the least advantaged, whether trans activist groups or landless people's movements, I think we come up with a list of concerns that sounds something like this: food, land, water, health, housing, safety, schooling. Those are the things that leap out to me from what acquaintance I have with radical organising and social movements among the least advantaged groups. I don't doubt that concerns about recognition, including political recognition, become part of that too, as we've seen in Australia, where Indigenous peoples' movements are very much concerned, certainly with land rights, with health, with housing, but also with recognition. Our most recent struggle, in fact, a struggle which was lost, was to establish a political mechanism known as the Voice to Parliament to recognise the existence of Indigenous people in the land. If we then, putting my sociological hat on, ask the question, why don't the least advantaged people have food, land, housing, health, safety, schooling, etc.? We come up against the issue of power structures, and these are very concrete issues indeed. We come up against decisions made by very actual, very present groups of men in suits. And we can name them, okay? We can name the state elites. We can name the transnational corporation managers. We can name the generals who are blasting so many people into pieces at the moment. We can name these super wealthy oligarchs. These are, if you like, the material, the concrete groups who are making decisions on the issues named or implied in the manifesto. So then we face the question of how do we actually contest this power, these powers in multiple sorts of authority and privilege. There I go back to the beginnings. I mentioned that I'm still a member of a union, and the old saying in union circles is, don't agonise, organise. So to me, the question of building power from below is where almost all, that is the crux. That is where progressive thinkers must ground their concerns somehow. And I think that is also the crux of our problems of social theory too. Because I think intellectuals, to say building power from below is the crux is not to say it doesn't mean doesn't require intellectual work. It does. Intellectuals do have work to do in a process of organising. We have concerns to organize our own intellectual workforce, for heaven's sake. Higher education is now a global capitalist industry with about 200 million students feeding fees into it, appropriated in both by direct corporations and indirectly through what purport to be public universities. That's just one example, but forms of organisation that are relevant there are relevant too. So intellectuals may also have the role of developing methods of organising and methods of making organising effective. In fact, have a lot of knowledge of that. We can research the power structures, we can produce information need. That, I think, is a really important task for the social sciences. And because we have capacity to circulate ideas, to write, to speak, to articulate information and ideas and methods, that also is an important responsibility of intellectuals collectively. So I guess this would be my recommendation, thinking of the question of where a project like the manifesto could be taken in the next iteration, that if it can develop concerns and techniques, if you like, that address the issues of building power from below, of organising in the most general sense, that I think is perhaps the strongest recommendation I would make about the direction in which this project might now go. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Robin. Very, very important points you raised. And we still have time now, half an hour, for discussion, for reacting to each other. And I'd like to open the floor for everybody. So we've heard different approaches. We've heard what Alain and Katharina told us from the convivialist perspective. We had the comments by Thais and Raywin, and who likes to come in and likes to respond what has been presented so far. I don't know. What do you think? We've had some comments on convivialism and proposals for future directions. Does these proposals...
You asked me. Frank, we lost you. You're not. I don't see you anymore. You know what to do? Well, I think Oliver is frozen too.
Oliver, yes, seems to be frozen.
All the Germans, all German people are frozen. That's the problem.
Now I'm back. I don't know. I think Frank is still frozen.
No.
Shall I just take over for a moment?
Yes.
So, I mean, the question was, we have heard each other, and of course, from different perspectives, from different localizations. And now perhaps we can have a second round among the speakers, just if you can, as they say in French, bounce back on one of the issues that seem particularly important to you. So we can take it in turns. Whoever wants to start, perhaps you, Alain, given that you were the second speaker.
Okay. I think Frank, before this vanishing, asked me to react. So I try to react. Just to think, one question to Katharina, very interesting, of course, proposal. I think it might be seen as a beautiful, regular ideal, to say it in the Kantian language. is it feasible, easily feasible, soon feasible? I'm not sure, of course. Two questions. Would you oppose to attempting to have a basic income at a national level, waiting for the international one? That's the first question. The second is, well, it's not a question; it's a proposal. Don't you think it might be interesting to say that what can be easily universalized is the universal legitimacy of a basic income? That was said in the manifestos. Every political system which does not create a basic income in a form or another one is non-legitimate. Right. Are only legitimate the states, the political powers, who create a minimum income unconditionally. After we can discuss about what unconditionally means and so on. That's a question to Katharina, and maybe I would have a question or a remark to Rewen. The very powerful position. Well, you said, finally, if I understand you well, of course, recognition is important, for instance, in Australia, for the original people. But it's not. What is more important is to fight for food, water, and so on and so on. And if we fight for food and water and land, we know against whom to fight, against big corporations and so on. We know who are the powerful people who do harm. Yes, so you minimize the struggle for recognition. I understand that. But all over the world, you see now some form or other of alt-right coming to power, and they come to power because they know how to talk about recognition. That's the main reason why they come to power. And so if we are not able to speak on those terms, on the terms of recognition, struggle for recognitions, I think we cannot win the struggles, the fights you want us to lead. And of course, it's important that we help people getting power from below. So.
Should I respond first, or should we give the floor to someone else first?
No, I think you can respond, and now that Frank is back, you can take over again as well. Please, Katharina, go ahead.
Thank you. I was thinking about responding, and then maybe also adding my own. I had questions to Raywin and to Thais, if that's fine. Sorry, Raywin and Thais, for adding on to the super nice questions that Alain just proposed, but I hope you don't mind. It's just out of curiosity. So in terms of, let me start with is it feasible? So I didn't want to focus so much on the objections, because I wanted to leave or what are the challenges, so that we could discuss it on the Q&A. I think a global UBI is certainly financially feasible. The point is if it's politically feasible. And oftentimes people like to discuss the financial feasibility, I think, as a scapegoat not to discuss the political issue. So why they might feel politically strong against the idea of a basic income, both at a nation or a global wide scale. So I think financially it is feasible. The difficulty is, I think, on the solidarity issue, on how we can build solidarity at a global scale. I think it seems obvious that we could, right? That we could build transnational solidarity among workers, among women, among people of color. I think it's easy to build very strong, those who are vulnerable on a large scale of categories, but it tends to be difficult for obvious reasons, often be pressures of the nation states that make it very difficult to build solidarity. So I think that's the biggest struggle. And with that, the second point, if I would oppose to a national basic income, no, I think perhaps, this might seem contradictory, but I think perhaps the first step to a global basic income is a nationwide one. But I was here to point the case for we shouldn't lose sight that it should be global. But once we have, there's a lot of people saying once we have the first nationwide basic income, we will have strong evidence that we should be implementing it across the world. It would be much easier to say, look, this country implemented a basic income, the wonderful things that it's happening, and it will just spill over to other places. And again, the issue with immigration can pose an additional pressure to maybe implement it globally or start implementing it within clusters. So I couldn't oppose it for that. And also because it doesn't seem right if we could have such a good outcome in one place to just oppose it because I feel like the end goal is something different. I think that wouldn't be fair. So if we could do it in a place and those people could benefit, let's do it. And then we'll fight for everyone else to have it also. And then the third, on whether a government can be legitimate if it can promote a basic income. Well, I would be open to accepting it. I think a basic income is a necessary condition for what we are facing now, both within our own countries, but globally. So for me, a government who's not looking at protecting their citizens for the challenges that we are now and will face in the future, in terms of labor displacement, labor replacement, in terms of ecological crisis, and in terms of the struggle for leisure time and for choose whatever we want to do, I think it's not a legitimate government. Not sure if everyone is in agreement with me or with you all, but I think that's a good proposal, and it could also be a stepping stone for then say, if that's the case, then implement it and go for it. We don't accept if you continue to disregard this possibility. So thank you very much for those questions. Now, I just had two questions to Raywin and to Thais. So on Raywin, I really enjoyed the focus that we often forget about collective bottom-up mobilization, not only through unions, but through whatever volunteer work, civic work that we can do together, local referendums, whatever we can do to push agendas from at a local and then maybe scale it up to whatever context that we want or whatever scale that we want. But my question is, if we are talking about global challenges and scaling up solutions, how do we promote local bottom-up collective mobilization, but also ensuring that it is communicating with transnational networks? It seems to be very difficult to be promoting transnational mobilization while we are still too focused, or we are still focusing on solutions that were highly localized. And I wanted to know your take on this. And then second, Thais, very interesting. Also, often, at least in Portugal, me and with friends from Argentina and Brazil, we talk about the fact that Latin America tends to be a laboratory for a lot of the political solutions that we see. And for example, what's happening in Argentina, we are having elections here in Portugal, and there's a lot of parties talking about Milei as the model moving forward and what we should be doing in our own countries too. So it is important what you're saying, but I'm wondering, how can we counter? What is your take on how can we counter this movement towards anarcho-capitalism in a strong way, maybe using what Raywin is saying about collective bottom-up mobilization, but again, doing it transnational, because if it's happening in Argentina, odds are that it's going to scale up to, there's going to be strong transnational movements behind it that are going to scale up to other countries. How do you think we can what can we do to counter it? Thank you. Sorry for being long at asking all this. Thank you.
Sorry, I was kicked off again. So, okay. I heard there were two questions from Marina to Raywin and to Thais. So maybe you'd like to, Raywin.
Just unmute. In relation to the issue that Alain raised, I certainly would not want to take a position that recognition issues don't matter and material issues do. That was not what I was trying to to focus on. I was really trying to direct our concern to what are the concerns that bottom-up movements are actually posing to us now. What are the and I absolutely recognise the concerns about recognition, about culture, about identity that are powerful for Indigenous groups, and for that matter, groups in sexual and gender politics. That is fair enough. So I don't want to take a stark position on that, but just to say we need to be guided by what is coming from the grassroots on this kind of issue. In response to Katerina's question, how do we address the issue of moving from local movements dealing with local problems and coming up with local solutions to the global scale where we know many of the direst problems are actually operating, climate change being the starkest. And I guess there, my point would be that there is practical experience at doing this from the movements that I've been talking about. So, for instance, Indigenous movements are not necessarily local at all. There is, in fact, a global network of Indigenous groups and Indigenous movements, and they are concerned with things like climate change, actually, seriously global issues. So, similarly with trans groups, for instance, there is, for instance, in London, a continent-wide network of trans groups representing, some of the most marginalised people in all of the societies. So, and I mean, we could go on. Unions, historically important example, and so forth. So I think we have to go to the experience and build on the practical experience that currently exists. It is possible to do. It won't be easy. No one imagines that. But there is experience from many directions on exactly this problem.
Thank you. Thais, there was also a question to you. Can you hear us, Thais? Are you there?
She's writing in the chat that there are technical problems.
Okay.
That she's trying to solve
with a microphone. Yeah, but maybe she'll be able to fix it. Before that, before maybe Thais comes back, we have a comment, a question by Susan Paulson here in the chat. Or Frederick, do you?
Yes, I mean, I'm kind of responding to Thais. I mean, from Brazil as well.
Yeah.
I think when you look at it, I mean, the situation is indeed quite dramatic. And when we look at the Convivialist Manifesto, kind of with its French inspiration, we clearly feel liberté, égalité, fraternité. And I mean, what she was pointing to with this anarcho-capitalism is that we also need to recuperate our vocabulary. I mean, liberty, freedom has been captured by the right. How can we actually re-sanify and recapture it? The issue of equality is absolutely essential. I mean, we see that the corporations are taking over. But I think that the specificity, and I mean, of the Convivialist Manifesto is the fraternity and the sorority. And that is the whole question of solidarity, in fact, which organizes it. And I think if we want to transform the manifesto into a truly global one, I mean, it is the solidarity, it is the process, it is the working together, it is the grassroots that our friends here are pointing to. And I mean, how do you transform a product into a process? And I mean, the only energy that we have left, in fact, and I'm speaking of experience in resistance, is exactly the solidarity and the fraternity with the people everywhere, but also with the collectives. We need this energy. And I mean, we need to build our defenses. But the fraternity, I would say, that's the ground. And of course, the end is a more equal and, society where everybody, all peoples and everyone can actually develop themselves. But it's a collective enterprise. But what I like about the Convivialist Manifesto is precisely this kind of aspiration that comes from it. And it's the question of fraternity, sorority, and solidarity, and that's essential in times that are so brutal, especially in Latin America. But I was recently in India; it's the same everywhere. So, I mean, just kind of an observation.
Thank you, Frederick. And that seems also to be the answer to what Susan put into the chat. She said that Thais described the anarcho-capitalist movements, the neoliberalism 2.0 in Argentina, for example, and how could the people, the diverse communities, with a lifestyle that is resonating with convivialism, how can they be supported from the side of convivialist scholars who are actually very distant from the struggles at the grassroots? But I think, Frederick, what you mentioned would be the answer to that. We need to build up networks of solidarity worth defend, that they are a way of life is worth living and defending against a neoliberal attacks worldwide. And what you said, Rewin, I think that is really an important issue. It's not only about juxtaposing the grassroots with the global level, but there are various levels in between, like indigenous people building up their global or transnational networks, and that it is important to see that it is not just the local versus the global, but these kinds of networks that are intellectual and very practical in terms of solidarity at the same time. And that is also maybe the important point we've been starting with, like what could be the task of a Convivialist International global movement. I think that the what and the how has to be interwoven very neatly, and that's the question: how can we build up intellectual global ideas of conviviality? So the process is as important as the content. And that would be my question to you. How could we go further from here? What could be the next steps? Has anybody an idea or proposal to make on that?
The next step is preparing the Third Manifesto, I think.
But how?
That's the question.
Mark Humbert.
Thank you. I think that we had a very interesting debate. Alain pointed out that scarcity was the focus of everything, of everyone, for years following the Western modernization. That means that scarcity and fighting against scarcity with free competition was the law of the past. I am a specialist of development economy. The reality from the beginning of the so-called battle fight against underdevelopment was in fact completely out any real solidarity between countries between peoples, but only economic war to win, to be the greatest economy of the world, from the United States, Europe, everywhere, and now it's China and India, and they are all competing instead of organizing solidarity. And that, I think that the word we have to disseminate is the word of solidarity. Freedom with solidarity. Not freedom to, but freedom to share. And the next steps will be to try to organize world networks of solidarity. This is my way of thinking. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. Frederick.
Yes, I think the problem, and we see that World Social Forum is in fact the organization of a multiplicity of social movements, weaving them together in kind of overlapping networks. And I mean, that's what the tapestry of global alternatives is doing. That's also what, for instance, the multi-convergencia das redes globais is trying to do. And I think that within the convivialist movement, I think we have to do the same, actually. And we have to start to build up this pluralism within our network. And in this sense, I think this meeting is so important because it's not the first one, but I mean that's the way to go. I mean to systematically include other voices, and I mean to bring other issues. I mean that's where I think that Raywin's vision was so important. I mean land, water, education, and all those issues, and precisely, I mean keeping the movement going, and to make sure that this bottom-up approaches and the grassroots that they also represented. So I would say to make it more radical, make it more rooted, to make it more grounded, and doing all the things that the World Social Forum is trying to do as well. And I mean, I think we should at our micro level, I mean, try to do the same, make it more plural, make it more open, and kind of do have the same movement of interweaving, of bringing things together, so that at our own small level, I would say that the pluralism and that the gender parity and the other issues that we have them sorted out as well, so that we can really become more global, more plural, more local, more convivial. I think that is what we are up to.
Thank you, Frederick. Before I thank you all, to read out what Thais wrote us into the chat, because obviously she cannot unmute herself. The microphone is not working anymore. So she's answering to Susan. So what could be a convivialist position? What could be could we do in terms of helping the struggle on the level of indigenous people, traditional peoples, and so on? And she says, first thing is to recover the principle of solidarity that we are losing to neoliberal experiments. In this sense, the first thing to face the changes in political ideas caused by neoliberalism. And then regarding the issue of Katharina, we know that the right is very well organized internationally with high investments. This organization seems to me much more timid in the progressive field, and the manifesto task can help with this. Yes, maybe these can be seen as closing remarks. We also had this idea or this analogy. We need to build up something like a counter hegemony, a counter society to the more Pellerin society, for example, that building up neoliberal policies worldwide and did a kind of network work, did intellectual work in the background and was present at the right time in the end of the 1970s. And maybe that is a bold vision, but convivialism should aim at building up a network of networks, intellectual networks, being able to present an alternative to the neoliberal catastrophes we are facing worldwide. And I have to thank you all now. That was really great to have you with us, to have the possibility to discuss these questions, these issues here at the World Social Forum. And maybe at the end you could put again a website into the chat that the people maybe on the YouTube channel will be able to see that, and how that they can see how they might be able to contact us if they wish, because we really want to go on with these discussions. It's really important that we build up an exchange, an intellectual network, so that we have more inputs, that we know what other people think, that we can relate to the ideas of intellectuals, activists from the Global South especially. And we will go on, and maybe there will be more possibilities to have these kinds of workshops to exchange, so that we can go on maybe with drafting a Third Convivialist Manifesto.
And many thanks to Frederick for having organized and planned and organized this session.
Yeah, many thanks also from my side, Frederick, and also Mark, and also Oliver, who all made that possible. Thanks to all, and maybe see you soon on other occasions.
Thank you, Frank.